Hello YouTube and welcome back. In this video we're going to be talking about setting up your valve springs. It's a real simple task, but I've seen a lot of people doing it wrong. Doing it wrong in so many different ways that I wanted to just touch base on the proper way to set up your springs. And the most important thing is how to measure the spring height correctly. And on a single spring, it's real simple. And I think that's what everybody's learning on a single spring, and it's the installed height from the retainer to the bottom of the spring pad where it sits. You measure it, you mic it, that's all you do. The problem comes when you start doing a double or a triple spring. And the reason being is that the retainer right off the bat has a step in it. So the retainer has a step in it. If you don't put the retainer on it and compensate for that step, your spring pressure is going to be totally off. A spring that sets up at 112 pounds is actually setting up at 130 pounds. There's also a step on the bottom of these Ford heads that also manipulates the inner spring. So the inner spring now has a step there and a step at the bottom that's actually putting more spring pressure. And if you don't compensate for those two steps, you're going to have a problem. The next problem I see is not using a spring tester correctly. If you need to learn how to use a spring tester correctly, you know the deal. Leave me a comment. Tell me you want to see a video just on how to use a spring tester correctly. The bottom of the pad actually moves as you test a spring. And I've seen a lot of people that were taught this way at a school, and they'll measure the top and the bottom, the locking part, with no spring in it. That's not the way you do it. The bottom of the spring pad moves. If you notice, there's a ruler next to it. The ruler is mounted at the bottom stationary, and the top has a slot. So as you push down and start pushing the spring down, the ruler moves with it. So if you set it up static with no spring in it, I don't know who's teaching you these things, but it's not the proper way to use a spring tester. So let's get out there. I'll come on the back of the shop, and I'm going to show you how to properly check your spring heights. In this video, we're going to be talking about setting up the valve springs. So on setting up the spring, it's very important. I almost want to say it's more important now than ever, but it's always been important. And the reason is lifters. There's such a problem with the lifters surviving in today's world, and there's a lot of reasons for that. We can get into lifters. If you want to hear more about lifters, leave me a comment and I'll talk more about lifters. But lifter failures are a lot of reasons, because it's the oil, the quality, the zinc, the phosphorus. Also, the check valve in the lifter, I'm talking about a hydraulic lifter, they're real weak these days. I mean, they can't stand any kind of pressure whatsoever. So back in the day, we would put a lot of spring pressure on the valve, on the seat, because we didn't want valve float when the valve opened. And we were going to race a lot of RPMs, and we didn't want valve float. Valve float is what was the problem back in the day. We would kill cams, we would kill parts because of valve float. That's all we had to worry about. We didn't have to worry about flattening a cam or a lifter collapsing if you set the preload correctly. All right, another video is lifter preload. Up there, down there, leave me a comment. You want to see lifter preload. All right, so let's get back to the spring. And the spring needs to be set up correctly. Why do we need to set the spring up correctly? Is that what I find nowadays, we're putting too much spring pressure on the valve seat, and it's just the lifters can't hang. You'll put a set of lifters in and you'll hear tick, tick, tick after a while. They may not even go through a cam break-in. So we want to make sure that we give the camshaft the right spring pressure. I want to make sure I give the cam exactly what the manufacturer wants, and I'm going to use the same manufacturer that manufactures the cam to manufacture the lifters in most scenarios. On high-end engines, a lot of times I'll put a Morel lifter, and that's all there is to it. Either that or an Isky lifter, no matter whose cam I'm using. That's a different example, high-end motors. But for the most part, you're going to order a comp cam and a set of comp lifters, and that's kind of what I recommend, because if you set everything up correctly and there's a problem, I use your cam, I use your lifters. And this could be anybody's. It could be Crane's or anybody else's. So do yourself a favor, do your customers a favor, and do the manufacturer a favor of putting the right spring pressure on the cam. Okay, all that being said, here we are now, and I'm still not talking about spring heights, but there's a problem. I see people come in here, hey, can I borrow your spring tester? I went to the school of whatever. I did, and they're not doing it correctly. And I don't understand how you can test spring pressures if you're not using the spring tester correctly. And that could be another video. Down there, up there, over there. Let me know if you want to know about spring testers. And I'm trying to keep the video a little bit shorter and not get all over the place like I'm already doing. But there's just so much in talking about this that you just can't talk about setting the spring height without telling you why everything is throwing the spring height off. All right. So you order a camshaft. This is a 351 Cleveland. It's actually a 351 modified. The same scenario, cylinder head, small block Ford, Cleveland, and we're putting in a roller cam into the motor. So I went ahead and ordered the springs that go in with this roller cam as a set. We want to make sure we're doing all comp cam, comp lifters, comp springs, retainers, keepers, everything all comp in the valve train. And here's the very first problem. You buy this spring and it gives you a spring part number in the catalog, and we get it. Back in the day, the cam card used to have what spring pressure they wanted, open and closed, on the base circle or on the nose. On the nose means all the way open at the tip. The base circle is all the way closed. It'll also be referred to as on the seat. So on the seat is the valve closed. The valve's on the seat. So that's going to be the static pressure, how much pressure there is on it before the valve gets opened. And then we have full lift on the nose, open pressure. So we want to make sure that we give the camshaft closed and open pressure, what the cam manufacturer wants. The cam manufacturer, they have programs. They used to do this by hand on a piece of paper. I don't know. I saw John Wayne do it once in a movie. And what it's doing is they're determining how much spring pressure is needed to keep the lifter on the cam. Destruction is going to happen when the lifter comes off the cam. Even for a split second, a millisecond, it comes off and slams back down to the cam. That's when we're going to break parts. So we're going to break parts when we don't have enough spring pressure to keep the lifter on the cam at all times, especially with the roller. If you start having valve flow with the roller, you'll destroy the end of the roller. The little needle bearings don't like to be slammed down on the camshaft. They want to be held on the camshaft and roll around the camshaft at any RPM. So, back in the day, they would tell you what they wanted for the spring pressure. You get the cam card, oh, it tells you there, I want 110 pounds on the seat, I want 300 open. You'd make that happen. They started to take that off of the cam cards. And you wonder, why would they take that off of the cam cards? Well, the reason they're taking that off the cam cards is because people are just going there looking at the spring and go buying somebody else's springs. So they're doing the homework, they're telling you what you need, and you're not buying their spring, you're just going and buying a pack spring or somebody else's spring. I get it, but if I was a cam manufacturer, I would rather you just have the right spring pressure no matter whose spring you're using. All that being said, there's another reason why they're doing it. I don't know. Somebody knows. But they're not telling you that anymore. So now you go look up what spring goes with that cam. Oh, it wants 112 pounds at 1,900. I'm done. Set the springs up at 1,900. I got 112 pounds and we're good to go. No, we're not. We're not good to go. Okay, so I called Comp up and I asked them, I said, tell me, I talked to Sean at Comp, I said, tell me what you want on the seat and you want open and closed, right? He said, well, I know they deal with a lot of different people. So he went in the catalog and looked up this part number and he told me right what it had on the box. And I said, no, I don't want what it has on the box. I got the box. I know exactly what it has on the box. I want you to tell me what you want closed and open. And he tries to tell me again, well, it's on the box. Well, no, on the box says, right here, it wants 112 pounds at 1,900. All right, so that's, just the spring itself. So we have a double spring. We have a double spring, and if I were to put this on a spring tester and push this down to 1,900, well, yeah, we have 112. I actually had 115 pounds. Good. You're always going to be varying within about 10 pounds. At first, it's going to have a little bit more. I like to cycle the spring a few times, but we're good to go. 115 on my tester. I have a spring tester. I also have a calibration spring, so I know I'm good to go. 115, awesome, within 3 pounds of what they said. That's perfectly fine. So you would think now, I've read enough books, I've seen enough things, I'm going to use something like this, or I'm going to use something like this, and let me bring you in closer and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Alright, so I'm going to use something like this. I'm going to put in a mic, If you need one of these mics, let me know. I'll give you the part number to it. Okay, so we're going to use a mic. This is a spring mic. This is for checking the install heights. It goes right in there. You're going to put a retainer in, and you're going to put in your 2 keepers. Not as easy to be done when I'm turned to my back, but I want to put this mic here, and here we are. We were at 1.960, so we want 1.900, so we can add a 60,000 shim, and we're done at the 1.900 install height. What is the problem that I'm seeing with this? And I don't know if any of y'all are seeing it or not, but here's the difference. See this retainer? See that step right there? Well, that's not flat. So that step is going to hold the spring. I got it upside down right now just to show you that's the way that it goes. So now it added some space there, right? So that's going to squeeze the spring more than when I tested it with just no retainer at all. Okay, so you want to test your spring when you're doing your spring testing with the retainer, but you don't go measure 1.900 from the top. You measure 1.900 from the top of this spring or the inner lip right there. So you're going to measure from there. We're going to go and measure. I like to take that little spot in the spring right there, and that's what we're going to measure the 1.900. But we need to do it with the retainer. Without the retainer, we had 112 pounds, 115. Once I put the retainer on, we no longer have that. What did we end up having? I had 130 pounds of spring pressure is what I end up having when I check this here. So without the retainer, we have 115. Once I put the retainer, still at 1.900, now we have 130 pounds. So you see how we're totally off on the spring pressure just because we didn't compensate for the retainer having a step. What else are we not compensating for? On this particular Ford head, there's a step right here. You see that step right there? So we have a step there, and then we have a step on the top. So once we have that step, this step, we put it on there, we're over 150 pounds spring pressure. Just at installing it at 1.900, like they're saying, install it at 1.900. Okay, no, the 1.900 they're talking about, that's how I test the spring. If I want to test the spring to make sure that it's accurate, I'll log this in our catalog, in our book that I keep the login of everything I do. If this was a race head, when it comes back in after a year of racing, I'm going to pull these springs out, I'm going to pull the log out, and I'm going to set it at 1.900, and then I'm going to test when it comes back. What is it at when it left and when it came back? Within 10 pounds or something, it's still serviceable to go back into service, especially if it's a circle track engine. If it's a drag race engine, when they get serviced at the end of the season, we put all new springs on anyway. But that's how you test the spring static, not with the retainer on it. So I call them up. I asked them, what do you want closed and open? He tells me he wants 112 pounds. Okay, so you do want 112 pounds. That's what this says here. But it's not going to be at 1.900. It's not going to be at the 1.900. So I don't care about that. I'm just going to make sure that I give it 112 pounds. So I'm actually going to put that spacing right there. I'm going to put some shims or washers on my springs on the inside when I put it on my spring tester, and then I'm going to put the retainer on it, and I'm going to bring it down to 112 pounds. I'm going to mic what the height is, and then I'm going to make sure that this has that there. I already know that I can't do it with what I have. How can we now get something to work when it's not right there? That's a different video, but I'm going to go ahead and add it to this video. What do we have? We have offset keepers. So if we needed more height, we don't really want to sit here and machine the spring pads. And the reason we don't want to machine the spring pads is all our measurements are taken off of the spring pads. So when I set my valve heights, if you're going to go compare your valve height to somebody else's valve height in a catalog, in a book, when you're going to look up in Process what is the valve height supposed to be on this, because these are non-adjustable, they're just bolt downs, well then it's giving you the measurement off the spring pad. If I sit there and cut 30 thousandths off my spring pad, I better note it in my book. Somebody down the road later, they're not going to know, and they're going to go set their valve stem heights up, and it's going to be wrong. So I try to never cut the spring pad down at all. I may manipulate the spring pad, but I'm not going to just go ahead and cut it down 30 thousandths. You don't want to get into water anyway. On some instances that it's a high performance build, something exotic, we may have to cut a little bit down on here, but we really don't want to. We don't want to weaken the cylinder head. Also, the bottom has a good locator, because it has this outer wall right here and this inner step. So if we cut that too much, we need to add a locator down here to keep the spring from moving. We want to have at least a locator, top, bottom, preferably both top and bottom. So what I'm going to end up doing is I am going to end up getting rid of the step up here because I have too much spring pressure. Also, what can we do? We can put an offset keeper. So these gold keepers here are 50 thousandths plus. So what it does, it raises my retainer by 50 thousandths so that I don't have to sit there and machine the bottom of the pad. So if you look at the two sideways, I don't know if you can see it, get a little closer. This one here is 50 thousandths higher. That's going to help me get my spring height that I need without machining the bottom of the pad. I am still going to have to machine the bottom of the pad because what I'm going to have to do is get rid of this inner step in here. It's making way too much spring pressure. A lot of times I'll just use the outer spring and get my 112 pounds. I wasn't able to do it on this one. I could go to the catalog and look for a different spring that's just a single spring as opposed to a double spring. There's the double spring that's inside. So a lot of times you can get rid of the inner, just use the outer, change spring. Okay, all that being said, I just wanted to just touch base on why people aren't setting stuff up correctly. They're not considering this step right here, or they're not considering that step right there. So tip of the day, don't forget that step. Don't forget that step. Make sure you compensate for that. Take a little washer. What I do is I'll even machine, see this bottom step that's there at the bottom? I'll take a piece of aluminum. I like to take these old aluminum retainers and I'll make a duplicate step. What you have here is what you have down there. And then now I can put that on my tester, put that on there, put that there, put my retainer, squeeze it, and I can get my actual spring pressure, and then I can determine what height I need to install this spring at. So you don't need to take the time and gonna lathe and machine you a little step that's equal to that bottom step, but you can measure this bottom step and add a washer. Measure the bottom step, whatever thickness you have there, add some washers, put them inside, and then now you're actually getting accurate spring pressure. Also, what do I see that people do wrong? Like I said, this isn't a video, bear with me, on how to use a spring tester. But that might be what needs to happen. Okay, I've seen people coming from schools that were taught this way, that will sit there and they say, oh, I want 1/900. They'll set their mic up to 1/900. Doesn't matter right now, but I'm just going to pick 1/900. And I've seen them do this. They put this here, they bring this down, they set their lock up to 1/900. Right there without a spring in it. They'll come up and then they'll go, oh, there I am. I'm checking my springs. No, you're not. You're not doing it correctly. If you see the bottom here, it moves because it's checking spring pressure. So the more pressure you get, this moves. So the mic right here, it has a slot in it. Right up here on top, it has a slot in it. So as you're checking spring pressure, this is moving. So if you put there and you mic that static without a spring in it, you're not getting the correct height. Okay, I have a dial indicator that I put on mine. I have it set at 1/900. Okay, there it is. 1/900. I can stop right up at my zero, but it moves. It moves with it. So this is moving with it. That's why this is floating right here, has a slot because as you start to push down on this bottom base, it's going to move down. So if you have this top already set at 1/900 with no spring pressure, it's not correct. It's not correct. Also, once again, we want to add the retainer to it. You can measure that thickness there and add that to the 1/900. Set your lock, come down, test your spring, and you're good to go. There's the bottom. My hand's in the way, but I ain't just going to be in the way. That's what it is. This isn't about how to use a spring tester, but I think a lot of people are using a spring tester wrong. I want to check my spring with the retainer, and then I have, like I said, a made up piece that's the same as the cylinder head. So when I squeeze that spring, I'm squeezing it correctly. So we're not going to end up having 180 pounds of spring pressure when we want 112 pounds of spring pressure. All right, so when we get into how to use a spring tester correctly, we have a calibration spring. If you buy one of these on eBay or used, which is the best place to buy them, then we have a spring that you can buy from Comp, and this is a spring that's going to give you 1/700. It's 76.3 pounds. We're going to put that in there. It's a single spring. We don't need a retainer, and we're going to bring that down, and it's going to calibrate your tester. It's going to go down, and if you need to, there's a little slot right here at the bottom that we can calibrate it right there. We can move this here and calibrate it. So we want to make sure that we set it 0 is 0. At the right opening, we have the right spring pressure, and we can test it. So we wanted to test our spring tester occasionally, once a week. Depends on how many cylinder heads you do. But all that being said, let me see if this helps add a little bit of love up there. All right, so what are we looking for? We're looking for the spring pressure on the seat. Also, valve closed, no lift. All this means the exact same thing. We want 112 pounds. That's what we want. We want to hit this number. If the manufacturer provided the right part number for the right spring, you really can't control the open one without changing the spring part number. There's a spring rate that you can play with, but for the most part, if you set this here, you want to check it open and make sure it's pretty darn close. But you can't play with changing the open pressure. All we can do is set the close pressure. If you go to the open pressure and it's wrong, you have the wrong spring. Okay, open pressure is on the nose, it's open, it's at max lift. What they give you is, and this is what's on the box, the 924-16. We have 112 pounds at 1/900, so we're going to test it at that. And then they have 355 pounds at 1/200. Well, that's a 700 lift. We don't have a 700 lift cam. What the cam manufacturer, Sean, told me is we want 308 pounds at our lift, at 550 lift that we're running. I called them up and they want 308 pounds. So that's what I have this written over here. That's what the cam manufacturer wants, open and closed on it. This is what's on the box. This is just for testing a spring. If, like I said, you tested and you're not compensating for those lips, then, all right, what do we have? At 1/900, we actually have 130 pounds. And we want to know why. Well, now we know why. And the reason is because we're not compensating for this step or the step in the cylinder head. All right, I hope that wasn't too much and then all over the place. I need to just focus more, but it's hard to discuss how to set up the spring properly, because then I have to get into how to use a spring tester properly that people aren't doing right. So I touched that a little bit. The important thing is that we give the camshaft closed and open pressure that the manufacturer wants. That's all we can do, is give them what the manufacturer wants, and then I haven't had a lifter failure, but it's not because of luck. It's because I'm giving the camshaft what it wants, and I'm not over putting too much spring pressure on the lifter. That's going to happen. A lot of people are having that. Back in the day, like I said, we'd run 110, 120, 130 pounds, 150 pounds on the seat, and that was okay. Not these days. We got roller cams that are running 100 pounds of spring pressure on a roller cam. And why? It's because of the lifter failures. All right, I hope that's been informative. If you need to know more about how to use a spring tester correctly, hit us up, like, subscribe, let somebody know, and let everybody know, put it out there. All right, so for those of you that do like to learn something and don't mind me talking too much, stick with the channel, and I'm gonna get these heads back so that we can get them back on the engine and get on the next set of heads. All right, so now we're back. I hope that was simple. I'm just dabbling into how to properly set your spring heights up. I think it's time to talk about how to machine the spring pads or how to use a spring tester correctly. If you want to see those things, like I said, thanks for bearing with me. Leave me a comment that you want to see how to use a spring tester correctly, because I think that's some of the problem is not using the tools correctly. If you want to know more about using this mic correctly, I used it. It's as simple. I don't think I need to make a video on it, but I am here to make a video on it if that's what you want to see. Hopefully also now you know there's offset keepers. Offset keeper shims and the tools that are necessary to check spring heights correctly. All right, as for me, I'm getting back to work because I got to finish up these cylinder heads. Have a good 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you on the next one.